Trade and Industry Minister Rob Davies says a comprehensive strategy is required to deal with the competition that imported chicken poses to local poultry producers. But his solution of raising general tariffs instead of imposing anti-dumping duties has disappointed local producers. Kevin Lovell, who's the CEO of the South African Poultry Association, and Chris Skitter, who's CEO of Astral Foods, joins us now for more detail on what exactly is playing out here. And Chris, let's perhaps start off with you as a producer within this space. I mean, what kind of landscape are we looking at? Because we know that it's imports that has posed quite a significant challenge, of course, with other factors to your profit line in the recent past.
Good morning, Alicia. Yes, locally we produce an order of about 19.5 million birds per week, and our per capita consumption growth has grown neatly from about 20 kgs per annum to 35, so a healthy growth. Now, we've made the investment and the integration to produce that number of birds to cater for local consumption. However, lately we've had a spur of imports from Brazil and now also from the EU, which is typically called round tripping because there's now a zero-based import tariff from the EU that was signed in about 99 or 2000. So, for instance, in the month of October, birds or mass poultry to the equivalent of about 8.8 million birds per week, where we produce 19, arrived on our shores, and it was flooded our market. So a typical good December for poultry producers that will set them up for the weaker months was just not there. And you've seen the recent results, poultry producers in the red or negative when it comes to margins, purely because of that influx of poultry into our country.
And I remember your statement a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two ago, really under pressure as a company, and you stated this. Kevin, perhaps, we always tend to simplify things. We get an impression. My impression is cheap imports dumping from Brazil. One imagines ships full of frozen chickens being, offloaded onto the quayside at Durban or wherever. And on the other hand, high input costs, grain and so on. Is it as simple as that? Because now Chris has already introduced this dimension of round tripping. So there might be tariffs for South American meat, but some of it's getting to Europe and then it comes here without a tariff.
Well, look, the trade environment is always very, very complex. So we've had a growth in imports in tonnage terms from Brazil. They make up a smaller share now of total imports, but they've grown in volume. The big growths actually come from Europe. Is that European product, what's called European, is it Brazilian? That's something we're investigating, or is it actually European? But to give an idea, the product that competes most with us is about 160,000 tons of it came in last year, of which 70% came from the EU. 3 years ago, they provide 0.5% of the imports of that same product. And the volumes have grown by nearly 150%. Lots of numbers, but the point is a rapid shift in volumes, a rapid change in the origin of those volumes as well. We simply cannot adapt to such massive shifts in volume. It's not actually about percentages, it's about tons, because we actually eat grams or kilograms of food. We don't worry about percentages. And that's really the harm. And when the minister, we'd had an action against Brazil, which is a specific action, anti-dumping, unfair trade. When he declined to approve that, ITAC had found it to exist. He came up, so we were disappointed, but he also came up with a general solution. He acknowledged we have problems within the industry. In his own words, he said there are polycentric issues involved. I'm afraid I still don't quite understand what polycentric issues are.
No, we don't either.
But it's fine, but those are the words that we used, and a comprehensive strategy is required. And we're very happy that he's looking at it now, and we've had quite a number of high-level engagements within DTI to look at what such a strategy could mean.
Chris, this sounds like the language of diplomacy and politics and bureaucracy. Meanwhile, you've got to run a business. It's taking too long, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've run out of time. We've seen 17 smaller companies in trouble, of which 7 already closed down up to the end of December. So there's no more time left. So we're in a time squeeze and quite a large margin squeeze. And if every day counts now, so time is of the essence, and we need to find solutions very quickly.
So if we're looking at, I mean, we've had the minister highlight that he's looking at solutions. He's, taken cognizance of the fact that there are problems that persist in the industry, and that proves to be very challenging for you as a producer. Chris, what would you like to hear him bring to the table here that would make you more competitive?
Well, Alicia, we're not against imports. It's about a leveling of the playing field. We don't want favors. All we want to do is level the playing field. There's a structural problem when it comes to the production cost of producing chicken locally versus Brazil or elsewhere in the world. And we're never going to be competitive from that structural base. We are not insufficient, and that's one of the arguments we have. We don't want protection against inefficiency. That we don't want. We want a level playing field, and that has to take care of subsidies that other countries take, and then come and compare with us with the industry that's not subsidized. And that is the kind of stuff we would like, more a general tariff increase on all imported poultry, just to level the playing field.
From a business's perspective, are you as efficient as you possibly could be, or can you be doing more work on your side?
We work with a biological asset, but we do comparisons with the United States, with EU and with Brazil, and we write up there our results of stockmanship or farming or producing chicken. We can compare, and we'll take anybody on in the world in their backyards. It's about the structural cost.
Yeah, look,
for instance,
technically we're actually more efficient than the US in converting feed into food. Structurally, because of input costs, the story is different. Now, obviously, it'll vary between the countries, but it means we're a top-tier producer when it comes to the technical ability to farm.
Now, Kevin, as by great good fortune or bad fortune, I don't know, there's a letter in Business Report this morning from David Walpert, Chief Executive Association of Meat Importers and Exporters. He says it's important to place chicken imports in perspective. Imports of chicken total only 10% of local production of comparable products. And he goes on to say that the bulk of imported chicken is actually more expensive than locally produced comparable products. And then he talks about the injection of brine solutions. So he seems to be in a different place.
Yeah, he is. And I was wondering whether that calculator that David Mania gave to Minister Sisulu is still available, because next time I meet David for coffee, I should offer it to him. Because, look, you can play with numbers as you wish, but using the official SARS figures, imports of all poultry, that's everything, so over 21, grew by, it's over 21% of consumption. However you look at the numbers, they're always more than 10%. However you look at the numbers, whatever you take out, it's grown by around about 15 to 19% in the last year. So when it comes to the numbers, David definitely needs a calculator. When it comes to the issue of brine, he confuses himself, actually, is that the chickens used to come primarily from Brazil. These ones he's talking about in particular, they now come primarily from the European Union. Most of those are brined to varying levels. When they get to South Africa, his very same members are the biggest reworkers of poultry, in which they thaw, inject and refreeze. So I think he confuses his own argument. However, what everybody should be aware of is that the government wants to regulate the practice of brining much more closely than it is now.
What is brining? It's injecting chickens with fluid to make them heavier.
No, it's making them taste better. I don't know if anybody out there has actually tried to grow their own peas and freeze them. Then you get mush when you thaw them. There's a special way of freezing, and when you freeze, you change the nature of the material. You put this stuff in, that's how it was invented initially, to make it equal to fresh. You can also add more than the equivalence point, and that's the debate that the government needs to come up. But it's a very beneficial thing for consumers, because they can buy frozen that tastes as good as fresh. And then there comes this argument point where David and I can have lots of coffee and discuss. David Walpert.
Not this David,
no,
David
Walpert. We do have coffee.
But David, just a quick other argument is, and people think they're paying for water, which is not true. If you and we do it on a daily basis, we have independent tasting panels, tasting all these variants of chickens, and we know where the consumer wants the brine injection, and that's what you state on your packaging. But if you take a breast meat and there's no bone, no skin, no injection, and you would pay about 45 Rand a kilo. Now you get an IQF, individually quick frozen, and there's skin, bone and brine. And that you're going to pay currently about 14 Rand a kilo. So it's 14 versus 45. If you take the brine, the skin and the bone and defrost that IQF, you still come in lower than the breast meat.
Yeah.
If you look at the protein content.
Let's get back to the costs here, and the last point from Walpert's letter. We want to get back to why the government can't fix this up, because what always puzzles me is that agriculture, which is the one sector where you'd think government needs to be flexible with protection, is the one sector in the South African economy that was just thrown open. So market forces in South Africa, but vulnerable to foreign things.
And we have an allowance, by the way, in terms of the WTO. We're allowed to subsidize.
But we're not claiming it.
No, it's just over 2 billion a year, 2.1 billion, can be used to subsidize local agriculture in terms of our WTO commitments, which we don't use. And obviously that money would have to come from somewhere if we were to do that, but there is actually space for government intervention in agriculture that it just hasn't been used.
So why don't they use it?
Well, I don't know. It brings me back to a point that I think you raised earlier, Alicia, is that this is a diplomatic, political process. And if everything, all the stars are aligned and all that sort of stuff, within 4 to 6 months we should have some regulatory relief for the industry. But by then the industry will have been in a negative state for more than a year. Can they survive that long? I would obviously, as an outsider representing them all, question that. Chris, as an insider, can perhaps speak more closely to that. But that's a real problem for us.
Yeah, Chris, we've been talking about catering to domestic demand. What about that export potential? I mean, why aren't we exporting more than we are at the moment? Are we exporting enough?
Just to follow on that, that's Walpert's last point. One of the questions is why all the extra capacity, which is in the industry, can't be used to drive exports? If there's a global surplus, I suppose there's not much chance of that.
Now, that's one of the arguments we have. We're on a little island here. We can export our maize, which is value addition into poultry, and push up our maize cost. We can then import chicken. So what you lose in the middle is the ability to create jobs. You don't add value to your basic soft commodities. And on the other hand, you import chicken. But we can't export because of phytosanitary reasons, and also because there is GM maize in this country through poultry. Some countries would just block you because there's GM maize, and then on the phytosanitary basis, because we have a H5N2 virus in ostriches down in Oudtshoorn, our borders are closed. Also, our sister countries or neighboring countries protect their local industries.
They do.
So in Namibia, we just had the start-up of a infant industry in poultry, and 42% import duty slapped on us. So overnight they protect us. So we've got no protection. You can import, but we can't export. So if you want to write a book on the perfect storm, this is the start of it. That's the first chapter. The other chapters would be on the rising input cost. The major participants in our cost structure is feed. Now, maize and soya over the past year and a half doubled. So where it cost you about 8 rand to raise a chicken, not all the other costs, slaughtering, processing, it is now 12 rand a kilo to raise a bird. And you simply can't recover it from the market because you import, and we also have a weak consumer currently. So perfect storm for poultry producers in this country.
If we're going to grow agriculture, we need to export more. All the meat industries, there's a bigger demand for meat now, and that will continue. So we can grow locally. We've grown by 50% in the last decade. We could probably do another 50 just for local demand. But if we could export, if we did have access to some of the key markets, particularly the same markets that dump their rubbish, because that's what they do, they dump stuff they don't want to eat, to us, we could sell them the stuff they want to eat. We could actually both increase trade flows between the countries and be in a much better position. But that requires first all these phytosanitary and trade measures, and then it requires that government and industry make an effort to actually open up targeted markets.
Especially, Kevin, and you've highlighted this in some of your notes, if the poultry industry can be used in actually achieving some of the NDP goals and aims, ambitions moving forward.
Correct. And we were specifically approached by the NDP to come up with proposals. What could we do to add towards that 1 million jobs that are promised within the NDP? And we've done the numbers. We know how we can add quite a lot of those jobs, depending on the different scenarios, maybe up to 100,000, not directly and indirectly in the grain industry. So we can actually be very, very useful to this creating a better life for all. And I think that's why where we sense there's a swing in the way the government is interacting with us. They see us as now we should partner, we can partner. If we do partner, we'll go somewhere. What do we do in the meantime? I think that's really the real worry now. How many companies will still be here by the time we've...
Well, and the question I want to ask there is how flexible is the industry? What was the number you said per week?
We produce 19.5 million birds per week for the local market.
This is the South African farmers.
Yes, for
Exactly.
local consumption.
Yeah.
For local
That's
consumption.
80 million a month.
Yes.
80 million
Well,
birds
it's about
a
a
month.
billion birds a year, roughly.
Gee, that's a
And
lot
on top
birds.
of that, we,
That's how much you eat, David.
Oh,
David,
God,
the-
no, he
David,
doesn't
the
look
interesting
into that.
thing is here, we don't have a volume control like an importer would have. So in order for me or for Astral to produce 4.5 million birds a week, every day, every minute of the day, distribute them, feed them, rear them, you have a breeding program from the grandparents of these birds. And to change that volume there is a 2.5-year program. So I can't adapt to quick imports. The local productions, the only thing I can do is stock up the cold storage and then sell it at a price whatever the market can take it away, and that's below cost. Now, we should say that's good for the consumer, but it's not good in general for the country because you don't have money to reinvest for growth.
Yeah.
And you know, you pay your taxes, you pay your dividends, the rest of that you want to employ into growth for the future.
Well,
No margin, no growth.
Gentlemen,